I'm Tom Riddell, and I am on the faculty at Smith, but also I've had administrative jobs in Interim. I'm also one of the class deans, subbing for somebody who retired in the middle of the year. I'm the dean of the sophomores, the juniors A through H, and the A Comstock scholars. It always takes me a while to remember all of that. I've taught a course, a first-year seminar on the Northampton State Hospital several times over the last, let's see, the first year was 1998, so over the last 16 years. I taught it for 8 years from 1998 to 2005, and then I've taught it these last 2 years as well. And during the last 2 years, I'm going to do one little switch here. I'm going to give you from 9 years ago now, in February. There was snow then too. And it looks like it was a sunny day like today. Might not have been quite as warm as today though. For the last 2 years, the students that in the class have focused their final projects and then some of their focus throughout the semester on the memorialization efforts that are now a little bit more full-blown than they have been in the past. As most of you know, I'm sure the hospital fully closed in 1993. The property and the site where the hospital was is being redeveloped, and the request for proposals from the state and from the city for redeveloping the property, one of the requirements was that the developer take some responsibility for supporting and encouraging memorialization efforts, memorializing the history of the hospital and the experience of patients and staff. Over the years, there have been a lot of efforts directed towards that, but over the last 6 or 7 years, there's a memorial committee that's connected to the Citizens Advisory Committee, which advises the developers about their plans and the course of the development. And the Citizens Advisory Committee appointed a memorial committee, and that committee has been working actively to try to develop a memorialization for the hospital. There's now a site for a park, and there are plans to restore the fountain that was in front of the main entrance to the hospital. And the committee recently got a $75,000 grant from the Community Preservation Act Committee in town. So there's some funding that's going to work towards restoring the fountain and then preparing that property for a memorial park. One of the things that the students in my class were asked to do was to begin to develop markers for the park that would tell the story of the history of the hospital. On the other hand, the students over the last 2 years have also been more broadly interested in memorialization, and so today some of the students from this year's class will present things that they were working on and their ideas, and then I have some more slides where I'll share with you a little bit from the projects of the students who couldn't be here today. So I'm going to turn it over to Lenny, Winnie, and Zoe, who are a team, and they will share with you what they've worked on. This is Winnie, and that's Lenny, and that's Zoe.
We got this project started with an email to Jackie Duda, and she then forwarded our email to lots of other people, and more people forwarded it. And then we arranged the interviews, so we got a whole bunch of responses. And then we made a list of questions, interviewed them in person, we have it on camera, and then afterwards we edited the clips, and we've made little highlight videos that we can show for you today. And these are the topics that we made them on. And then we wrote up transcripts of these highlight videos and sent them to the interviewees just so that they could confirm and they were happy with what they had said and how it was presented.
So the reason why we chose to memorialize the hospital through video recording is so that we could remember the faces of the former staff workers who used to work at the hospital, and to make it kind of more relevant and empathetic, because some of us have no attachment to the hospital, but we still want to help memorialize it. And we decided to get in touch with the staff members because they're a lot easier to get in contact with, and they're more willing to speak about their experiences compared to former patients.
So we interviewed 3 staff workers, Michelle Ryder, Mary Quinn, and Alan Ascott, and this is a video of them introducing themselves.
My name is Mary Quinn, and I started working as a nursing attendant, and when I left after 18 years, I left as the director of staff development. Most of the time I worked in social service. I started working November 27th, 1972. It's funny, most people will remember the date they started. And then I left in 1991, and that was around a layoff. I got laid off. I didn't leave on my own. I would not have. But I got laid off because of the closing.
Yeah.
I'm Michelle Ryder, and I started at the State Hospital in 1972, and I started as a clinical social work supervisor. And within 2 years, the administration changed from a medical model to a more team-integrated model, and I became the first non-medical unit director. They call them unit directors, essentially a program manager. So I did that from 74 until 85, and then in 85 I became the director of staff development and human resources, and I was in that position until 1990 when I left.
My name's Alan Nebraska, and I had 3 different positions during my tenure at the hospital. I started as a social worker in September of 1974. Since I was a psych major and I was always interested in mental illness, I took the first opportunity to get a job at the state hospital. So I initially was a social worker, and after a few years another position was called junior mental health coordinator, which was a slight upgrade in pay, and I got that. And then I went to graduate school while I was there, and after I completed graduate school I got a promotion to staff psychologist, which later the title was changed to psychologist 2. And that was my title for the rest of my my years with the Department of Mental Health.
When did you leave the hospital?
I think it was January of 1990. Because I was actually at the hospital a little over 15 years.
So this is a summary of what they said in the video.
So basically these were all the interview questions that we asked each person while we were filming them. So for example, the ones that are highlighted we thought were the most interesting, and we're going to show you that in the next couple of videos. But so like, what kind of relationship do the employees and patients have, and was there any stigma associated with being a mental health care worker, as well as what was their reaction towards the hospital closing and the demolition of the hospital.
So this first video I'll show you is about patient-staff, their views on patient-staff relationships.
Again, highly variable, but one thing I saw a lot of that it was kind of a paternalistic attitude and maternalistic attitude. I saw a lot, like as a caseworker, my first mentor was the most maternalistic social worker you'll ever meet. She was mother hen in the best way. I don't mean that in a derogatory sense. She truly was a mother hen. She cared about every one of her patients and really worked hard to have the best things happen for them. But she looked at it as her own personal, professional, and moral responsibility, you know, and she really was very involved with her patients. And I didn't go. I wasn't quite as. I mean, she was my mentor, and I saw the positive effects of what she did, and so I think I did it too. I wasn't quite as extreme as she was, but there's a lot of benefit to that for patient and staff.
Yeah.
But now it's much more into, quote, professional boundaries. I think that professional boundary business can be a little too rigid, in that there's a lot. And again, there's positive and negative to that, you know. So I understand the arguments very well, but for some patients, those, quote, professional boundaries aren't helpful.
I discovered some people when I very first came who were just naturally gifted, who were compassionate, loving people, and who really liked talking to patients and helping them and teaching them and so forth. If there was anything, even with the well-intended people, that I objected to, it was a sort of an infantilization that would happen, which would basically be that because they were, let's say, for example, a patient would sit here with us, I might call her by her first name, she would call me Ms. Ryder.
I see.
You know, there was this hierarchy that was established, and it was very, very hard to change that. Mm-hmm. When I first came, nurses all wore uniforms. By the time we were in the late 70s, I would say, we had gotten rid of that because we wanted this to look more natural and be more natural and more comfortable. And then there were people whose were, you know, 2 or 3 or 4 generations of the same family who worked at the hospital.
Oh, yeah.
And they had no talent whatsoever. They were not interested in the job. It didn't matter. You know, it was a good job, a good paying job, a secure job. They had benefits and so forth, and so they were there. And you could certainly find cruelty, meanness, and even sometimes real abuse that would go on there different times. And over years, again, the Department of Mental Health developed a lot of quite good, not only rules and regulations, but ways to investigate, to properly investigate, ways to pay attention to the needs of the staff so that they would pay attention to the needs of the patients. Almost if you would see it in concentric circles, and you would say that if you are in a situation where the patient is your bullseye, like the waves coming into the shore, you would understand that the movement is in the direction of taking care of the people in the middle. What this was more like the ripples in a pool of water when you throw a stone in. The patient is I used to say, when I was in my worst moods, I would say to my staff, we'd be running a terrific hospital if it weren't for these damn patients. You know, they were just such a pain in the neck, because they would invariably do crazy things like crazy people would do. And you'd have to, I hope you understand it when I say crazy, it's the term is entirely meant lovingly.
Yes.
You know, they're my peeps, I love them. So, But there was definitely this feeling of condescension and sometimes well-intended but very infantilizing kind of attitude toward the patients.
Yeah.
And then that tended to move sort of up the concentric circles so that the administration was not very kind to the staff.
Oh.
And the staff were not necessarily people, as I said, with education or talent or knowing what they were doing. So they were treated badly, and it was a real pecking order kind of a situation.
Yeah.
And until we started getting into really understanding, what humane treatment is, how to help people to develop those basic skills that would enable them to leave hospital, begin to train staff, to give staff the benefit of the doubt that if somebody trained them in humane care and in understanding even the basic thing of understanding how to talk to a person who is psychotic so that they will be trusting and they will know that you're trying to understand them rather than talking down to them and treating them like you think they're nuts and those kinds of things. So, yeah, so it was a very mixed bag for sure. And I remember a lot of those people, just their names, their faces, their, what happened to them and so forth. There's just, it's a very personal thing to be allowed into anybody's private mental, emotional world. And when somebody is disturbed and distressed, it's more so even because they don't know how to let you in, and yet they're struggling to do that. And you don't know how to get in, and yet you're struggling to do that. So it's a very, really intimate experience talking to somebody who's really struggling to be understood and to understand you.
I think that because the state hospital was in such a difficult state by the time I was there, again, we didn't have a lot of things. We were very poor by the time I got there, so we didn't have a lot of things. So the staff spent a lot of money buying things for our patients. That's really how much they cared for our patients. And we get a lot of bad rep that, we're mean to the patients and all that stuff. And it's really not true. Yeah, there were people who were. There's no doubt about that. I'm not saying that there weren't. But the employees truly cared about the patients. You have to understand that a lot of the employees lived on grounds. I lived on grounds. So these were my neighbors, my friends. You grew to have an appreciation that they were part of your family, and they were treated as part of your family. Part of your family that needed some extra help, but a lot of things came out of our own pockets, and the special things that we do, and we would go way out of our way to help people and to do extra things for people. So the relationships were very close, very close. There were very, very few families involved, but there were families involved and very involved, helping out, etc. But there just weren't a lot, so we were their family. We really, literally were their family. My family actually became guardian to one of the patients just because she had nothing else, and she was going out in the community, and somebody needed to watch. People spent. I had patients at my house Christmas, Thanksgiving. We would just bring people home because they just didn't have anything else.
So our second clip is of them talking about their opinions on stigma towards staff workers and also patients.
It's always difficult when you said that you were a state hospital employee, in this area, in Northampton, most people were. So, I mean, we were a big, employer in the area. So it wasn't too bad. If you got outside of that, if I went home to my family's house, people were like, you work at the state hospital? Well, you got all those crazy people? And do you get beat up all the time? And I was like, okay, no. That's not how it is. And so, I mean, I certainly think there's much less stigma associated with the employees than there is with the patients. And that's why when I talk about the state hospital, I always say I was at the state hospital for 18 years. I never say that I was an employee or a patient. Because really, it doesn't make a difference. And people need to treat people as people. And I mean, it's this whole thing that I've spent every day since, I left there trying to get people to understand it's an illness and stop treating people so differently. It's unjust everywhere.
I certainly think at the beginning, the first 5 years or so, there was a tremendous stigma working there. And 5 years of my knowledge, and certainly all the time before that, by around in the mid to late 70s, that we went out into the community and began helping people to see that that just because you worked at the state hospital didn't mean that you were a jailer or that you were a mean person or that you didn't know what you were talking about. And again, over time, it took a long time, but I think by the mid-'80s, certainly, I would say there was a much different attitude in the community about the collaboration that we did with the community mental health system. There was a mutual respect on both sides of that. The other thing is that there was, of course, a lot of stigma for family members of people with mental illness.
Oh, what was it like?
And it was very, very difficult. A lot of families, we met many, many family members who had no idea that they had a relative at the state hospital, or who knew about this person, but they would, had been locked away a long time ago, their grandparent or whatever, and they, had never met them. And we started reuniting families and bringing families in. And in the mid-1970s and into the 80s, the National Alliance for the Mentally Ill was formed, and we started running parent and family member and friend support groups. But first at the hospital, certain members of the, in particular, the clinical staff would run these meetings, and they would be both educational and supportive kind of meetings and resource gathering kinds of meetings. And then eventually they started making them happen in the communities. Mm-hmm. And so we were really, it was a campaign to destigmatize. I mean, that was very specifically, if you look up the National Alliance for the Mentally Ill, you will still see that there's still an anti-stigma campaign that they run all over the country. I mean, it's a very significant and meaningful thing. Because one of the things that we used to believe was that schizophrenia was like a family disease, like a social disease. And over time, we've learned that it's a brain disease. Mm-hmm. And so stigmatizing of families was a very, very big issue. And of course, most of Western Mass is rural, not as rural as it was, but still is. And so if you go up to northern Berkshire County, all they knew was if somebody was acting peculiar, you sent them to Northampton. You got rid of them. You got them the hell out of your county, because who knew what they were going to do? Exactly. When actually the vast majority of people with mental illness are not dangerous. They're not harmful to anybody. They're more likely to be harmful to themselves than anybody else. And one of the harmfulness that they're likely to be is something we might call not knowing enough to come in out of the rain. They're self-harmful by way of personal neglect, not because they're actually going out of their way to try to hurt themselves, but just because they don't understand and don't know how to take care of themselves. Exactly. So stigma is a very important issue, and something I would really appreciate for you as students, for you to really pay a lot of attention to it and see it as being a central issue, even to this day, because even to this day, in a town like Northampton, you will see that anybody that, not college students, but if somebody comes into this town who's dressed a little different and acts a little different and maybe talks to the trees as they walk down the street or whatever, they are going to be noticed in a way that's potentially going to make them uncomfortable, or that's going to make the people who are noticing them think, oh, that's
No one thought badly about me, if that's what you mean. People were always kind of leery of mental patients. They were and still are. And sometimes it's well-founded and sometimes not. It all depends on the particular case. Everybody gets hung up on these labels, and that's just wrong. They're still individuals.
Yeah.
And the individual makes all the difference. It isn't just lack of understanding, it's fear. And some of the fear is justified. I mean, when you got, some of the, well, here it is, the 50th anniversary of Kennedy's assassination, and then you got these more recent incidents of the Newtown, and other mass shootings. And these people who are doing this, they're obviously very disturbed people. And people worry about that. Frankly, I don't blame them. I worry about that. I mean, you want to just go about your business, go to the mall and feel safe. And then these things happen.
Yeah.
It's become, it's become a very unsafe world. When you get all this publicity about, these kind of people, when you start digging and see what these people are all about, well, then it kind of generalizes out. People get more concerned about anybody who's unusual. But like I say, in that sense, I know better. I know it really is an individual case situation. Some are potentially harmful to themselves, some not. Some potentially harmful to others not. Some aren't harmful in any stretch of the imagination, but it's an individual case. And you really have to do some in-depth work with an individual to know, or to have a good sense of whether they're going to be safe or not. And even then, it's not forever. Yeah. You only know for a certain period of time whether or not it's likely they're going to be safe. Mm-hmm. So I don't blame people when they're leery.
So that was just a really small sample of the hours of video that we have from these interviews. But do you have any questions for us about what we learned? I mean, there's a lot more to this, so we just couldn't fit it into this amount of time. Yes?
I'm interested to know, how did you find the former staff members?
Actually, that was through an email to Jackie Duda, who forwarded. Jackie Duda forwarded my email to yes.
There's Jackie.
Exactly, and I really appreciate it. Yes, and so that's actually how I wouldn't have known how to do it otherwise. Thank you.
And Jackie worked at the hospital.
Yes.
And has lots of connections with people who work there.
So you're like being videotaped. From when did you work there? From 1970 to 76.
Did any of the workers see the value of closing the hospital?
I think some of them described it as part of when they were hired. That was part of what they knew they were going to have to do. So they felt that their goal was to kind of close it. So when they closed it, they felt that they had accomplished what they were supposed to do.
Jackie, do you want to say anything about that?
The question exactly was what?
Did any of the workers see the value of closing the hospital?
I don't know of any that did. Personally, I'm sure there were some. I think that Alan Grass has summed it up beautifully by saying, they threw the baby on the bench, the roof that we washed. That it left no alternative, really, and created a lot of homelessness. I think the original homelessness we saw in the cities surrounding Northampton were mental patients who were hanging around, smoking cigarettes, begging for change. And so I don't think it was really appropriate to completely deinstitutionalize and closed the last facility in the region that helped people with mental illness.
Well, at one point, and I can't remember, it may have been Michelle. There's a clip that you three showed in class, I think, where she talked a little bit about some of the planning that preceded basically the writing on the wall that the hospital was going to close, and some of that planning was around a smaller facility that actually has now been kind of developed in Worcester. There's Worcester, the old hospital's completely gone. There was a fire actually. The building that was built in the 50s or 60s is still there, but they have a completely new facility that looks remarkably like a modern version of the old one. And it's called the Worcester Recovery Center and Hospital, and the idea is that it's for short-term stays and not for long-term care, which is what this hospital did. And that was kind of what Michelle said, that there was some planning.
There was a great deal of planning in the community as well as for the community, and in ways to get employees accustomed to the idea that they were going from the institutional setting they worked in to a community setting, and there was a lot of work done in that area. What they couldn't do, though, was de-institutionalize institutionalized patients. And while now it's true that if I have some kind of a mental event in my life, I can perhaps be hospitalized for a short-term stay at Worcester, Cooley Dickinson Hospital, Noble Hospital, Springfield Hospital. We all have, there are mental facilities for mental treatment of mentally ill, short-term, long-term, and all these places. But we didn't have it back then. So patients went to these places and then hung out on the streets all day long. You couldn't de-institutionalize them. And some of those who could not go into community settings very easily and went into these smaller facilities were silently abused and mistreated, but not where anyone could see them, because only one or two employees worked the whole week, and a supervisor who traveled around on a monthly basis and visited people. So there were pros and cons to all of this. Leaving the hospital made life a lot better for many patients, though. So it wasn't all bad. I just don't think you could plan for everything. And so people did fall through the cracks, as is always the case in human services, no matter how much you try to do.
A question that may be off base, and you can shut me off if it is, but I'm interested in what you've discovered about through your work through the state hospital. But I'm also curious to know how it's affected you in terms of today and in your future. If anybody wants to answer that, I'd be pleased to hear from you.
Hard question.
I think we learned a lot about how complex the story was, because it might be easy just from our initial readings to think that the staff workers were like jailers and that they didn't care for the patients, because it seemed like the hospital closed for that reason. But I think we learned a lot about how many different facets there were to the closing and to mental health care.
Well, I guess I would ask you to go a little deeper as to, this is what you discovered, but my question is, how is it affecting you in terms of today and your future, if it has?
I think I can say I originally took this class because I was interested in psychology, and so I learned a lot more about that aspect. And it's always easy to study someone who's normal and healthy, but it's also really helpful to study somebody who is not healthy and see what's kind of deviating. So I think, that gave me a better perspective on that and kind of how you might help someone like that. And I think, it's still an avenue I'd like to pursue in my life, so it just gave me more realm of what it's like. Yeah.
Thank you.
For me, I really had absolutely no idea how important the Northampton State Hospital was to this community. So when I was doing this project, I was so kind of surprised by how much this experience really influenced the staff workers, even to this day, even though it's been so many years that the hospital is closed. And I think it's made me definitely more aware of the treatment and like the current affairs of mental health care, and how it really isn't talked about in the media that much. And listening to their stories really gave me like a better perspective of how people feel about this. Yeah.
May I ask one more question?
Sure.
That's perhaps also directed to you, Tom. What informs your concept of memorialization? I know that concept from different concepts, for example, Holocaust memorialization, World War II, how that is done in Israel, in Holland, in the former Soviet Union, in contemporary Germany. And so where do you derive your guidance for this concept of memorialization? I mean, what would you try to effect with memorializing it? For example, I found it pleasant to see that the fountain will be restored, at least, and that there is a park, and certain trees will be kept, hopefully also certain buildings. I often walk up there in my daily walking routines, but for whose purpose is memorialization? And
well, obviously that's a hard question. And I think that one of the things that I've discovered and the classes that I've taught have discovered is that, as Winnie just said, it's a very complex story, it's a very complex history. People have different takes on it and different relationships to it. People have different observations of it from a distance. And I think that part of what's required in understanding and recalling that history is to pay attention to that complexity and the contradictions, and to recognize that there's a point of view, or there are points of view that people who work there have. There are points of view that people who are patients there have. Those are very hard to get access to. And there are points of view having to do with the development of the understanding of mental health and mental illness, and the way that that's developed over time, and the way that that's affected treatment over time. And I think that one of the things that the students have helped me appreciate is that to some extent throughout that story there's progress, but a lot of the progress is based on understanding mistakes and things that seem in retrospect to be gross mistakes. So we're back here again.
Did you, in your research, did you discover anything about the ceremony they had where they had musicians have music come out of the building, and people came from all, patients were there, staff members were, I was there, and it was an amazing event. And there were articles all over the paper about how people who had been patients there felt that this was their home and it was being destroyed. And it was just, I was fairly new to the area then, and it was just such a wonderful event. Did you read about that and learn about that? It was truly amazing.
We read about it, and some of the people talked about it. We didn't show those clips, but yeah, a lot of people described it in the same way that you did, as a really moving event that really, it kind of gave it a sense of closure too, I guess, because it was like right before they were going to knock it down.
And there was a big controversy over tearing that building down.
The other answer to Gertrude's question, I think I alluded to it earlier, is that there have been a lot of different forms of memorialization, one of which is the event in November of 2000 that Anna Schulite organized, and actually had several components to it, including kind of an opening panel with perspectives on the institution and the development of the whole field. And then before the event up at the hospital, patients and other people who had experience at the hospital gathering to recall their experience and their recollections. But there have been lots of other ways of preserving the history of the hospital. The work that these 3 students have done interviewing some people serves as a, it'll end up somewhere, whether it ends up in the Smith Archives or Forbes Library or Historic Northampton. And all of those places already have collected history and information and artifacts. And the Memorial Park is one particularly symbolic representation of remembering history. Barbara, do you want
Can
to
I
say?
say just a little sort of, because about that, I'm also on the Memorialization Committee, and I live right near the hospital, and Jackie and I live like 3 or 4 doors away from each other. And when the memorialization was created in like 2006, I think we started, these are very slow-moving processes, and we just have to accept that. We held a number of public listening, what we call public listening sessions, so that we could get a sense of what the community, various facets of the community, what would mean something to them to memorialize this. Because if you say you walk up there, you've noticed it seems much more like a housing development than anything else now. And we certainly felt, a lot of us felt that it was important to physically have a memorial there, as well as having things on the, well, maybe then we weren't thinking so much about the web, but having things like these interviews. This is just fabulous that you capture these people. One of the things that really came to the top of the list was creating some sort of park and renovating and replacing the fountain, having the fountain back in place. There were a number of books, and as Tom said, there are a number of physical collections of archives and objects from the hospital, so that we really did a lot of searching to find out, well, what would mean something to somebody. And I think one of the most poignant things is to say, whenever you're anywhere and you see this was here, it really gives you a sense of what you would have seen, and then through these placards and then links to things on the web, will really try and tell the history of the place and the people and the buildings and the patients and the treatment, and from all different points of view. It's a difficult task, but we're trying.
And that's what interests me. How do subsequent generations or the community at large interact with that history? Is that important?
Right. Somebody has to know it before they can react to it or find or do anything about it.
To answer your question, I guess our guiding, idea for memorializing was that this is really for like the new generation, because we've been to the former site of the state hospital, and honestly, I would never have known that there was a hospital there if I didn't take Tom's class, to be quite honest. And so really the last remaining history of the Northampton Hospital are the people, because they're still here. So we want to capture their experiences before they're gone. So video recording is really a good way to do that, because we can always put it up on YouTube, and you can share it social media with your friends. So that's primarily why we chose to memorialize it through this.
Thanks. So the next presentation is going to be from Rachel, and she's going to find it and then get it started. One of the other things that students in the class have focused on over the last couple of years is that one of the other things that has happened, again through the work of the Northampton Historical Commission and then other people in town, is identifying and marking the burial ground that was associated with the hospital. From 1858 until about the 1920s, somewhere around 600 patients were buried at the hospital or other places in town. And the burial ground is out west of where all the buildings were, where Old Main was, out in the agricultural fields. And so several students have focused on that as a way to further memorialize the history of the hospital. And so I'm going to turn it over to Rachel.
Would you mind hearing that you do the next slide? So thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. As Tom said, my name is Rachel School, and I am presenting, I guess, an analytical look at the burial grounds. Like he said, there's close to 608 people. That's the best assessment that we have who were buried. The best word I can attribute to the burial grounds are pitiful at best. It's essentially a mass ditch, a mass grave really. These people were put into ditches. Some of them didn't have names. They were unknown to people who were back burying them. These were somebody's mother, a brother, a friend. This was somebody's child who essentially was put into a ground with no indication they ever existed. It's insane to think that there's such lack of ceremony to it. I thought it really bothered me an incredible amount. Thank you. So the first idea for the burial grounds is that idea that hindsight is 20/20. Like Tom said, it's only when looking back at our past actions we know what would have been the best course and can fully criticize and appreciate maybe mistakes that we have made. That's acknowledgement that there were actions, mostly in the beginning and towards the beginning duration of the existence of the state hospital that were exceptionally bad. It wasn't really bad things done by bad people, bad intentions, but a lack of understanding, a lack of medical research, really a lack of interest in how these people were being treated. Additionally, there was respect for people who did have to suffer the hands of just ignorance and, for lack of a better word, just cruelty. Again, not necessarily intended to be cruelty, but these people were very much exiles of society. They were pushed very, very furthest point, out of sight, out of mind, and they suffered greatly for it. And then gratitude too, that if it wasn't for the people who had to suffer these horrible things and perish along the way, we wouldn't have the mental care facility that we have now, the idea and the understanding of mental illness that we do have now. And I think that we have a lot of people who suffered horribly, a huge deal of gratitude for we would not have come if they hadn't suffered hugely at our hands. Thank you. So the plaque, this is just a Revolutionary Soldiers, but the plaque would, some sort of acknowledgement. There's little to no acknowledgement. There's a bench that's very dilapidated that there is in fact people buried under the ground. There are souls that are subterranean. So like those known by name, those only known to God. Again, there are people who have no names when they're being buried. For all intents and purposes, they don't exist. And again, 608 of the former patients of the Northampton State Hospital laid to rest. This process, unfortunately, did end, I believe, in 1921. That's when they stopped doing mass burials. I'm not sure if it was maybe more privatized, parents took care of it, or maybe there was just more ceremony given to the patients by the staff. Kira, this is supposed to be one of beauty. We have also a telescope that would go alongside the plaques, even though it would be in an optimal position where it would be elevated so people could see it better. We could also have a telescope that would, I thought metaphorical, I think it was a beautiful metaphor because I came up with it myself, that there would be this telescope and then people could look like up to the sky, kind of hindsight 20/20, looking towards the future, but also acknowledging the past. And it's very nice, it's very open clear. It's a beautiful sight, I think, especially in winter, or fall, spring, all the seasons. It's something that I think deserves looking at, and a telescope would enhance the ability to see that and give more ceremony. It would draw more attention to the fact that there's a plaque there. People see the plaque, know that there are, in fact, people buried underneath the ground. It's more just, again, it's more of a marker indicating that there are people here. It's supposed to collect attention, really. Cute. That's us. Models. I think there I am. And this is actually probably where the plaque would go. Again, there's just the bench I mentioned beforehand, and then it's between these birch trees, and there's
all these very nice leaves going there. And the plaque would most likely be elevated big enough so it could be seen, small enough so that it wouldn't take up too much space, and would be alongside the telescope.
Next one.
Yes, I thought that was coming. There are hindrances. The cost of this, I looked it up, and the seacoast industry, which is where we get our telescope, is very pricey. Permission also, this is public ground, maybe people would be opposed to having a telescope, the plaque there. There's a lot of opinions and a lot of hoops to jump through even to get to the most basic steps to get this even started. Accessibility, maybe not everybody can see it, maybe not everybody can use the telescope, see the plaque, and it is, it's kind of, if you don't know where to look, you probably aren't going to see it. It's not nearly as grand and as collective as maybe a more public area would be. The durability, I do not know, I do not trust the seacoast industry, but they are as best as I can get, so I'm not exactly sure how long it would last. It would also probably require maintenance, very frequent maintenance, make sure nobody steals the telescope. I would steal that telescope if I could. And time too, this isn't really it's a delayed gratification process. It's not going to be very quick, it's going to require a lot of money, and at best it'll take several years before it's even put into place. And again, even more time before it can be enjoyed and become more of a staple collectively to enjoy. And I think it's the last slide. Yes. And then are there any questions? Yes.
I have a question, but I thought it was a great idea.
Oh, thank you. It's very nice.
If the telescope is so expensive, how about something that's really not a telescope that looks like a telescope?
I don't know how many paper towel rolls we can have laying there so we can look at the sky. But I also, another student in class mentioned the idea of a lot of them can be coin operated, and that might not be the best idea. People might not have coins, but there could also be some sort of like a tribute or collective where people could pay like a donation, I guess. And I know that unfortunately the frog has not had much luck.
I think he's doing okay.
Oh, is he? Oh, good. I know that he's had some thievery has been occurring, but that's good.
I think they have a pretty thief-proof box
You
now.
should look to the frog then, yes, because that seems like a good idea. And then there could be more donations.
Son of frog.
Son of frog, yes. As always, we respond. We could look towards that and making sure the donation center would be well preserved and very protected, and we could go to the Northampton State Hospital Memorial Center. So I think that's very much a cyclical rewarding towards the basis for this, that it goes towards understanding the hospital better.
Actually, no, can I just make a comment about
Oh, yes,
because I'm on that committee too.
Yes.
The Historical Commission is kind of, the Northampton Historical Commission is sort of in charge of that bench. And we have been trying, I'm hopeful that this spring finally the wood will be replaced with some stone. So that we won't have the problem of it continually rotting and deteriorating. And also with the Memorialization Committee, our intention is that along with the plaques that would be on the site near where Old Main was, that we'd have other plaques or signage pointing people to that, and vice versa, that when you came upon that area where the bench is, you'd be directed to the other memorial site where the fountain is. So we do have that plan in mind. We hadn't thought of having something else there besides the bench, something we could certainly think about. I mean, to be honest, we've had such trouble, getting that bench to be in good shape that I don't know if, we could feel we could introduce another element that would need either maintenance or we have to worry about. But I'll certainly bring it back to the Historical Commission.
Oh, wow.
And we can see what happens.
All right, thank you so much.
Rachel, you can come over and return the favor. Okay.
Oh, yes, thank you.
Oh, that's okay. So, get out of here.
I think my signal was like looking towards the slide. That's why
So you want to get, can you get out of here?
Yes, out of the PowerPoint.
Yeah. Okay. Super. All right, and go back to this one.
This one?
Yeah.
Yes.
So I'm going to summarize some of the ideas that the other students in the class had. One is Andy Doyle, and one of the things that she focused on was trying to figure out ways of telling people where the memorial park is. It's in the kind of in the middle of the development. It's in an area that is very close to where Old Main was, the main administration building, on the top of the hill. And one concern that several people in town have expressed is that it's kind of off the beaten path. And if the top of the hill is fully developed, the park will be evident to a lot of people who live there, but maybe not so much to other people. So Andy's idea was to develop a signage system, letting people know where it was. So next one. Keep clicking. Signs. Click again. Signs for people on foot. You are here with maps to the memorial park. There's a system of trails that exist already. Those trails will be maintained as the development continues. The idea is that there's a lot of possibility for foot traffic and bike traffic. And while people are utilizing those, Andy's idea is to have signs that would direct people to the memorial park. Next one. Also signs for people driving. Northampton State Hospital Memorial Park this way. Hit it again. So this is a map that outlines some of the plans for development. The memorial park's about right here. There's a line of single-family homes that are developed. These are condos that are developed. All this stuff up here is perspective. So that's all empty land now. There's a possibility that it might be developed in the future, although Mass Development reports that they've kind of run out of money. So if it's going to be developed, it's going to have to be somebody else's money that finances it. Next. So there's the memorial park. And next. That's about where the community gardens are, which is very close to where Jackie and Barbara live, opposite Laurel. So this is an example of a sign. And that shows you how to get there. So clearly the signs would require designing and so on, but the idea basically is some system of signage to help people find their way. Another thing that classes for the last 2 years have focused on are ideas about images that could be used on markers, historical plaques, and text that would go along with it. And so this is one example from Jasmine Collins, who's actually from Springfield, with a nice quote, nice image of the hospital back in the 19th century. You can tell. Actually, I think that this image is from shortly after the hospital opened in 1858. So they're not cars, but they're wagons and animals. I'm not sure if they're horses or cows. And then there was text about the history of the hospital. Jackie Foodie was also someone who worked on that. So next. There, another image. Obviously, if there are several markers, we're going to have to branch out and find other images than ones of the main administration building. Historic Northampton has lots of images of the hospital. There's an exhibit actually at Historic Northampton now. Hi, Madeline.
Hi, sorry about my mom.
I've already summarized your project, but you can do it yourself in a minute, okay? The exhibit at Historic Northampton is actually the 20th anniversary of one of the first memorialization efforts. There's a pamphlet that Historic Northampton has called The Life and Death of Northampton State Hospital, and it's largely interviews with the people who worked at the hospital, but there's some interviews with the people who were patients. And it marked the closing of the hospital. There was an exhibit at Historic Northampton in 1994, and they've remounted it now 20 years later. And it's worth a look. Next. And there is an example of some text that might go along with an image explaining, summarizing the history of the hospital. And the second marker is another idea that's been developing, and that is to have a map of the grounds, and then some means by which people basically have to have a smartphone or some other similar device and have a QR code that would take you probably to a website, and that you can click the next one. This is one of the best maps. It's not, the resolution's not good, so we'd have to find a better image, but it has all of the buildings and all of the grounds, along with a key that tells you what all the buildings are, when they were constructed, if it's known who the architects were, and then also similarly for all the grounds. And you could click on a number, a building, and then that might take you to at least a couple of photos of that part of the site. Okay, next. These two students work together, Sharon Vizcaíno and Zoe Langsdale. Sharon's from Mexico and Zoe's from Amherst. This is an image that was produced by an original group of people back around 2000, I think, Jackie, is that right? For what was called the Fountain Project. And the idea was
Justin Peel's drawing, I think.
Right, so Justin Peel was through that. And it was an idea about creating a park that included a restoration of the fountain. The fountain's stored at BPW, actually. Most of it, not all of it. And then in last year's class, a student created a Facebook page for the Northampton State Hospital Memorial Park, and Zoe, you can click on those. Zoe updated it. I'm curious to see something when this shows up. All right, so there's a Northampton State Hospital Memorial Park page on Facebook, and it has articles that have been in the Gazette, other information. On here, there are some images of designs, landscape designs for the park. There's an article that was about the auction of items that were left over at the hospital, and the auction raised a little bit over $5,000, so that's been added to the budget for the project. Yeah.
Is the map you just showed us on the site?
No, I don't think it is actually. There's a map of, this is the development, and there's a map somewhere on here, I think, of a design for the actual park. What I was curious about is that if you go on Facebook, Sarah Palin's been showing up quite a lot over on the right side of the page, but we don't need to see that. Yeah, she's not there now, like somebody else. All right, next, or back to that one and click on this one. So Zoe worked on the Facebook page and did some updating, and you have to go to the full view, I think. So down here. There we go. Okay, good.
Wow, that's a beautiful picture.
So this is sort of in development, but it was the beginning of the architecture of a web page. Sorry.
Where did that picture come from? I've never seen that.
Actually, so go to images, Rachel, and no, not videos. That's not right. Go to articles. No, go to memorial. Oh, go to pictures. Sorry, go to pictures. Back up. No, that's not what I want. Shoot. Back up.
I have a whole bunch of pictures of
Oh, here. Go to this. I'd never seen this before, actually. But this is a Flickr page, and it's got a lot of old images, and I think that may be where that image came from. Barbara?
It's that one on the top.
It's the one, yeah.
Because of the smoke.
Yeah, right, yeah.
And how did you get to this? You found this from Facebook to Flickr?
No, so this is the web page that the other student created. And then she has a link to this Flickr page. And the Flickr page probably, you want to click on it again, Rachel? It's on Flickr. So on Flickr, it's Northampton State Hospital, and it's just a collection of a lot of images. I'd never seen it before, actually. Okay, back to the, pardon?
Where did she get these photos?
Well, that's Flickr's, how would you describe Flickr?
Anybody can put up a picture.
Yeah.
People have contributed those?
Yeah.
And then they
Yeah.
tag it with Northampton State Hospital, so it's a bunch of different
If you
people
click
that
on it,
post
you
those
can find the
pictures.
original
Because, you know,
source of
during-
it. You should-
During habeas corpus, which is that musical memorialization you referred to, we worked 2 weeks as volunteers to set that up before it happened.
Yeah.
And a lot of people that Anna Schulet, the artist who did this installation, gathered,
Yeah.
came from everywhere, Connecticut, Maryland, locally, many Smith College students helped.
Yeah.
And she had this big cadre of volunteers, and we all had different jobs to do. And throughout the week, many people went through the hospital, instead of doing what we were supposed to do. We were all running up and down this empty hospital building. We just thought it was so cool. And a lot of people took thousands of pictures.
Yeah.
And we all shared them with each other later, digitally.
Okay.
I didn't happen to keep them.
Yeah. And I has a website, 1856.org, where some of that stuff is reproduced.
But some of those photographs were really, really amazing.
Yeah.
And it
And
looks
they're-
like some of them are there.
So Forbes Library has a website on the State Hospital. Nielsen has one that's connected to my course. And on both of those locations, there are lots of different sites where there are a lot of photographs collected. Next. Two other students in the class, whoops, I think I forgot to put their name on this, Charlotte Mann and Jesse Tibbetts, and they're actually continuing to work on this. And I don't know if they've been in touch with you, Barbara, or not, but they've also got ideas about the burial ground. Rachel had a little passage that could go on a plaque, and this is another example of what they thought might be useful to put on a plaque. Several of the students, I think, Rachel's not the only one. I guess I've been around too long and have gotten too used to the fact that the trails out west of the hospital are used for recreation, running, walking, dog walking, hanging out, watching the river go by, watching the seasons change, enjoying the views, etc., etc. I guess I've gotten too used to the idea that there's a burial ground there. But a number of the students were quite upset about the fact that it's a burial ground and it's used in the way that it's used. And most people don't know it's there. There is a bench and there are markers on the bench, but most people, I think, are completely unaware that there's a burial ground there. And so a number of the students have kind of latched onto that idea and would like to make it more well known that that is what it is. So next. And this map was done in association with the rededication of the burial ground and the putting of the bench in. So this is where the bench is, and there's juniper trees around it. And as this arrow shows, one of the things, if a pair of good, strong binoculars were there, one thing that you could do is to point it towards where the hospital was and up on the hill. And there's still one old building that's still there. It's the coach house, and during the winter when the leaves are gone, you get a real good view of the coach house from where the bench is. And in this original conception, the idea was that this would be a really good place for a marker. It's at the joining of the trail. This trail comes from where cars park for the dog park, and this trail comes from Burt's Pit Road. And they join there, and there's the river down there. Next. And Jesse and Charlotte's idea is to, not just have a little plaque. They want a big, huge stone marker that people can't miss and would be curious about, why is that big, huge stone there? And what does this plaque say? And here's another example of a passage that might go on it. That might be it, but see if there's anything after that. Okay, I think that's it. Madeline's found us. Madeline, hello.
It's 2 o'clock.
So come on in, and we'll see if we can find your.
Hey everyone, I don't know how much of this Tom has given you, so if I'm repeating stuff, please let me know by some expedient method, like wave your arms at me or something. I don't know. And the other thing I learned from this class, always double check the date and time. I'd like to begin this by explaining a little about what I'm doing. I've, for the past month or so, been working with the Community Center ServiceNet on writing brief client biographies for the newsletter. In other words, I'm documenting people's recoveries and how they ended up managing their mental illness in a context, a non-institutional context, which sounds very jargony, but I promise I'll explain in a second. And I'd like to begin with some evidence I came across during the course of class that inspired me to get working on this in the first place. So please switch the slide, please, Tom.
Yes.
Thanks. So as you can see, because it's in really big letters, 0.8% of news articles on mental health, this is a study done in New Zealand in 1999, directly put a mentally ill person. And news coverage of deinstitutionalization movements, typically, if they interview mental health professionals at all, it's psychiatrists who are not necessarily the most sympathetic. And one hospital superintendent, when asked about the possible consequences of deinstitutionalization, predicted, and I quote, arson, rape, sodomy, and even murder, and later claimed there'd be someone else would be at risk of life and limb. Now, obviously, this didn't happen. This stuff obviously derives from pernicious stereotypes about mentally ill people being dangerous, being able to take care of themselves, being not worth talking to, even in news articles about them. But it's not just harmful, and it's not just stereotypical. It's useless. So imagine that you've just been diagnosed with some kind of serious mental illness. You've just been diagnosed with depression or bipolar disorder or schizophrenia. Then maybe you've been in a hospital, maybe you haven't, maybe you're just on medication, maybe you're not even on that. Hey, in any event, you're trying to get your life back together. And you're looking for examples of people who've done this before you. And you find this. Yeah, that's, not only is that not encouraging, it's useless. Provides no model for how to get your life back together. It provides no sense of what's been done, what's out there, what's available. And if anything, it's discouraging. So when I saw this and I came across in the literature we read in the class some calls for not just better memorialization, although there was some of that, but better coverage and more ethical coverage of mental illness overall. Well, I got really mad, and I decided to take some kind of action. So I can switch to the next slide. Thanks. Tom put me in touch with Wendy Payson at ServiceNet, who edits a monthly newsletter of ServiceNet clients' life stories. So for the past month or so, I've been working on writing these. These life stories are taken directly from interviews with people who work for ServiceNet. The most recent one I did was the story of a woman who was diagnosed with bipolar 1 in the 1970s, who lost a marriage, lost custody of her son, lost a good 30 years of her life, but is now healthy, more or less, who is now working full-time as a recovery counselor at ServiceNet, and who is now a proud grandmother with custody of her grandson. It's very sweet. And these stories are derived directly from interviews with subjects, and they're run past the subjects before publication to ensure that they're the most dignified, accurate, and respectful versions of their lives that will be on the paper. And perhaps just as importantly, we try to focus equally on local resources like recovery centers and halfway houses and support groups such as CSO, Our House, the Rainy River House, to let people know what's out there and let them know what's available for them. We also focus on individual coping strategies such as time with family, just focus on work, on efforts to get back into the community piece by piece. Generally, how these people put their lives back together and the advice they would pass on to someone in their position. So really my goal here, and I think ServiceNet's goal here, is to portray life after the diagnosis, not just to memorialize people's struggles, although again, I think that's a very worthy, valuable goal, and I admire all the work that my classmates, that many of you have put forward towards trying to do that, but to provide some kind of hope for people who are just now getting diagnosed, people who are just now developing mental illness, and who are wondering where their lives go now. Who are wondering, what about me? Because the Northampton State Hospital might be gone, but mental illness is still here, and likelihood is that it's going to be here with us for a while. So what I'm trying to do is to provide some kind of look in the future. And if anyone's interested, the next slide has a link to the ServiceNet website, where they actually have some video interviews, which I was not involved with, but which are pretty cool and you should watch, with former clients telling recovery stories. And if you have a spare 5-10 minutes, I advise you to go see those, because they might not change your life, but they will change your afternoon. Anyone have any questions?
So how often do they do these interviews? How often is their newsletter? Is it like once a month or something?
It's about once a month.
Yeah.
So I've only had the opportunity to work on this stories.
And are they going to try to do one like every month or?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah.
Ideally, they're going to speed up a little more now that they have several people on the project.
Yeah.
When it was just Rainies and it was about once a month.
And is the videoing an ongoing project?
About 1 or 2 of those come out a year.
Pardon?
About 1 or 2 of the videos come out a year.
Uh-huh.
Those are all made by one man, the videographer, and I'm not involved with them at all.
Uh-huh.
But I bet I can put you in touch with him if anyone's interested.
Could you restate again, because you said it a little bit fast towards the end, how your project emerged from the class? You said something, you respect and admire the work that your fellow classmates do about the history, and but how your questions emerged from the class?
Sure, I'll go that real fast. But Tom put me in touch when I mentioned my concerns about mental illness journalism and about memorialization as a project in general with Wendy Payson, who is the director of the newsletter at ServiceNet. And since then, I've been working with her to essentially do work that I think satisfies my own ethical standards, but using the institutional framework and the resources of ServiceNet, which is the largest mental health organization, community mental health organization in Western Massachusetts, and therefore allows me to get done a lot more than I would be able to do on my own.
Who reads the newsletter? Is it patients or?
It's people who are involved with ServiceNet directly, but I believe it's also available if you look for it to people who aren't necessarily clients right now but who are considering it, but you're right that it's not very easily accessible on the website, and I'm considering proposing that we move it to some easier to find location, because if it's meant for people who aren't necessarily that far along in recovery yet, then they might not be able to access it through ServiceNet directly. But again, we do have to worry about privacy concerns since we're using people's full names here and a lot of very sensitive information about them. So we're striking a balance between, you know, how much personal information we want to get out into the world versus the people, making sure that people who need to see this stuff have somewhere to find it. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, the dilemma is that, you know, the criticism about the approach that journalism tends to take versus better, more accurate information and figuring out how to, you know, bridge that gap.
Yes.
Somebody back here. Yeah.
So what interesting or surprising things did you learn from being privy to these interviews and writing these articles?
Well, that's a good question, because factually a lot of it isn't stuff that you, if you're remotely involved with mental health activism or with the mental health system in general, you hear stories about people losing their jobs, people losing their families, people losing years of their lives, but however factually similar they are to what you've already heard, it's different when you hear it from someone's own mouth. It's different when you look at someone and realize they've actually been through all this. It makes it a lot more immediate, a lot more real. And that's one reason I think using individual stories rather than aggregate stories with names changed is valuable. It gives you a better look at an individual's life and it gives it more impact.
The last 2 years I've taken the class to ServiceNet and met with them, and when we've met with them, there have been people from the staff who kind of explain what ServiceNet is and what it does, but they've always had someone who is one of their clients, and I think the students have always found those testimonies and, you know, their explanations about who they are and what their experience has been just really powerful. Any other questions for Madeline?
I'm just curious, what was the reaction to you interviewing them? Were they receptive? Were they apprehensive?
Well, again, that's a difficult question because I wasn't present for the interview because I got involved with this only a month ago. So people have been eager to meet me, but so far it hasn't happened due to scheduling constraints. But when I'm actually doing interviews as opposed to working off this basic experience, I don't really know.
You know, it's a great project because you hear the positive side.
Yeah.
You know, because most of the stuff you read in the newspaper is really the negative, sensational side.
Any other questions about anything else that we've talked about? I'm still trying to figure out whether I'm going to teach the course next fall or not. I think I've said that I'm going to, but I'm still pondering in my brain.
What's the title of the course?
The Evolution and Transformation of Northampton State Hospital. And it's a first-year seminar, so all of the students here are first-year students. So there are two veterans over here. Alana is a sophomore and Sarah's a junior.
I think you're too far gone.
Yeah, I can't extricate myself now. All right, thank you all very much for coming.